Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Han Weerestein, and I'm going to tell you a couple of things about AI in IVF today. Is it the next big thing, or can we consider it to be just a glorified algorithm? A little bit about my own background. I've been employed since 2001 by Ziltrix International in various international roles, and I have provided monitoring and alarm solutions to many IVF customers globally. I'm responsible for development of Ziltrix monitoring and alarm solutions as co-owner, currently in the role of Chief Commercial Officer. A couple of disclosures. Financial, I am a salary-based employee of Ziltrix International, and non-financial, I am working for Ziltrix International with companies that either use or develop AI in a commercial way, but I do not get any financial or other reimbursements by any company other than my employer. So, what exactly is AI? AI is an overarching term for many subfields. This Venn diagram shows an overview of different fields within the landscape of AI. It's clearly visible that, for example, machine learning is a subset of AI, and within the machine learning subsets, there are other subsets specifically designed to achieve goals. It's also visible that these subsets within the machine learning field have a certain overlap. And it is not always clear where one starts and the other one ends. So let's focus on one of the fields that is well known by many people today, which is natural language processing. Interacting with AI brings the technology to life to many people, and effectively this makes it possible for a computer model to understand a spoken or a written command by a human. For example, ChatGPT, which is considered to be multimodal generative AI, it is a framework that brings large language models and natural language processing together, and it has caught mass media attention in recent years. So let's take a closer look at the data flows dealing with models like ChatGPT. Chatbots, like for example ChatGPT, can be very useful assistants, and many people are used to using generative AI on a daily basis. It is now in your phone, it is in your operating system, it is in a lot of other applications. However, people are not always aware of how the data flows. So I've taken the liberty of making a very generic flow diagram of how the data flows in generative AI. Everything always starts with the user. The user has a prompt in which they can put data or ask a question that is then sent into the system where a large language extraction happens. Information is taken from databases, there is a series of API calls, and that information is then sent to a post processor that does some post processing and formulates a chatbot reply, which in turn is sent back to the user, presented as the answer. Now let's put on another layer. There is something called the private domain and the public domain. If a user sends information to the public AI model, they effectively cross a red line, and the data is then in the public domain. This means there are risks involved. Public AI models have a certain number of risks. Firstly, they are black boxes. You never know exactly what is happening in the model, and you also don't know where the information is coming from, how the system got to that information, and which information actually is in the model. Secondly, there is something called hallucination. Hallucination of AI is a common side effect, which means A user is presented with information that is incorrect. However, a user might not be aware of the fact that this information is incorrect, only if it is very apparent that this information is correct. Hence, the six-fingered hand. Always key is going to be data quality. When public models are trained with rubbish data, the outcome will equally be rubbish too. And finally, when the data entered by the user crosses the aforementioned, from the last slide, red line, it is no longer under the user's control. What does this mean? With these limitations, it is effectively going to be impossible to use public AI models in laboratory environments, and only if you use strictly validated private AI systems, it's possible to use them. Are there no systems out there that are actually useful today? Well, fortunately there are, because in recent years there have been improvements made in the field of AI up to a level where some systems can currently already outperform humans. In June 24, the Radboud UMC Hospital in Nijmegen published a paper in which they stated that AI actually better detects prostate cancer on an MRI than radiologists. In this case, the AI detected prostate cancer more accurately than radiologists, and additionally it also provided false positives half as often. In this case, it means that the software developed is more effective in making a diagnosis than humans, but the outcome is a relatively simple yes or no answer. Does this patient actually have cancer? Yes or no? Does this then mean that tools with the same effectiveness can be expected in the field of IVF anytime soon? Well, let's take a step back and look at the Venn diagram. There is another interesting subset of machine learning called deep learning. And this subset is specifically useful for image analysis. And I will give you some examples of systems that are either currently being developed or even offered commercially. One, for example, is AI-assisted sperm selection. This is motility prediction based on deep learning using sperm videos, and it has shown promising results. And in order to do this, they use convolutional neural networks. Spermatozoa are, in this case, morphologically assessed to help define the normal versus the abnormal units. And in this case, the favorable morphological characteristics can be identified a lot quicker than is possible with the manual methods. Preferable is going to be that these methods can be performed in real time without additional staining or the need for increased objectivity, because of course they can do damage to the spermatozoa in question. And the results of these techniques are already promising and show comparable outcomes of the software versus traditional morphokinetic methods. And these technologies can then potentially help to remove the bias and significantly improve the selection timing and process streamlining. Because, well, we all know it takes a lot of time doing the sperm selection by hand. And this is just an example of sperm selection tools. There are also AI-assisted embryo selection tools. There are quite a few companies in the market today that are developing tools like this. It is too much to go through all of them, unfortunately, but if we look at how they work, most companies use morphological, morphokinetics, and segmentational image analysis to produce a ranking of the available embryos. Also, most will integrate with your EMR, streamlining the data flows, and offer integration with one or usually multiple of the existing time-lapse platforms out there. There's even companies that offer additional models that can predict euploidy without having to perform PGTA testing. And this, of course, is very promising, but if we look at one of the most recent studies done by Illingworth et al. In 2024, they were not able to show non-inferiority of deep learning for clinical pregnancy rate when compared to the standard morphology at a predefined prioritization scheme. But even though the embryo selection tools currently out there might not be able to help to improve live birth rates, it can definitely help with logistic processes in the lab. It is very difficult to take embryos out of the incubator, put them under the microscope, make sure that all of the moving parts in that whole logistical process are handled correctly, and make sure that these embryos without damage are being placed in the incubators again. So these tools could definitely be helpful. Is there more out there? Well, there actually is. There's also things like AI-assisted EMR systems. EMR systems have already greatly improved automation, but they can be further optimized with, for example, AI-assisted modules. Think about things like workflow optimization and prediction of scheduling and staffing in the labs. If you know exactly when you're going to need how many people at which point in time, that can be very helpful. And we all know that the staffing of an IVF lab is a very daunting thing. Systems like this also provide messaging to the entire care team and can even do that to patients and allow for 24/7 secure access from any device. So it doesn't mean you have to be in the lab to access the information. Some of these systems even offer the ability to compare results between labs, offering the ability to identify both the positive and negative outliers. This allows you to actually see if a lab is more successful, what is going to be the reason of that, and use that information to make other labs better. Are there then any other potential targets for AI in IVF? Well, effectively, all the steps in the IVF process can potentially be supported by AI-assisted technologies. I have one more example here, which is, for example, ovarian stimulation. By using AI technology, it is possible to tailor the FSH for a specific patient. And by optimizing the dose-response curve, it is possible to lower the risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, which in case lowers the risk of implantation rejection after embryo transfer. And this provides the lab with a number of possibilities. There is potential predictive analysis for treatment success. If you know which treatment is going to be successful for a specific patient at a specific time, it's going to be very useful. It also provides the ability to do further automation of all the steps. But finally, you actually have the ability to provide personalized treatment plans. There could be better successes achieved with tailoring treatments to a specific patient's condition or even genetic makeup. Well, that's all nice, but what are actually the goals of using AI technology in IVF labs? We can define two major goals. Everybody always strives to improve live birth rates, but there is a secondary goal which is equally important. This could be more automation in the laboratories. Both of these goals have their benefits and have their challenges. And if we look at the benefits of improving live birth rates, of course, the holy grail is to have higher success rates with less cycles. The benefits of more automation could be, of course, a cost saving, so having more cycles with less staff, and this in turn could even produce a higher reproducibility between the cycles. But both come with their challenges. The main question always is the technology proven effective? And for improving live birth rates, there is a cost of how much cost is there going to be added per cycle. For automation, the question remains, can the promised cost savings be achieved in practice? And all of the evidence then comes to the word effectiveness. We can also have a look at cost effectiveness, because even though something might work, the benefits might not outweigh the additional costs. And this is specifically true for labs that get a fixed reimbursement from health insurance companies and cannot cover the additional costs of these technologies. So I've given you a lot of information already, but now let's take a look on how to actually get there. There are a number of prerequisites that are important for labs to be able to implement AI into the lab. First and foremost, there is a need for standardization and control. IVF labs need to control everything to produce the most trustworthy data. Firstly, there are lab differences. Every lab uses slightly different protocols, different equipment, media, staff training, which effectively makes it very difficult to compare data between these labs. Secondly, research data is being generated in labs that do not have monitoring systems in place to properly log the functioning of equipment and facilities at all times. And also, not all laboratories have well-working facility controls. Therefore, room temperature, humidity, VOC levels and power are not controlled up to a level considered acceptable. And incubators and, for example, heated surfaces are notoriously difficult to set up properly, and they need constant monitoring to provide the best possible culturing conditions. In order to counteract this, a lot of people are putting in sensors in the lab, and with the fast growing number of sensors placed in labs, it is becoming virtually impossible for embryologists to oversee everything, and this is causing a data overflow. And I'm not even talking about calibration yet. Also, the next generation of embryologists do struggle more with making sense of the basic science behind the sensors, since there simply was less focus on that subject during their education. And finally, doing proper randomized trials in IVF lab is difficult, sometimes even impossible due to the group size limitations or the absence of a control group. This all boils down to the fact that the results that are being generated have a certain uncertainty. And this uncertainty can unfortunately not be quantified. But if this data is then fed to the model, this uncertainty is also fed to the model. Of course, there are ethical issues we also need to consider. Firstly, we have data privacy and ownership. This means how sensitive patient data from fertility treatments is safeguarded. This often involves both partners' data, and the responsibility of the lab does not end with just the patient. Secondly, there is the question of AI-driven decisions. There are ethical considerations for relying on AI for embryo grading and selection, and therefore it is very important to select AI-driven tools that offer full transparency. And finally, there is the question of over-reliance on technology. There are risks involved if AI technology fails or simply provides biased results. So, how are we going about to responsibly introduce AI technologies into practice? I've put together a little list, so let's go through it together. First and foremost, make sure you validate the clinical effectiveness. So compare AI performance to established clinical standards and ensure that these AI tools meet or exceed these benchmarks. And secondly, evaluate tools through independent trials and avoid relying solely on vendor-provided results, because unfortunately we all know there is an incentive to have biased papers. Make sure to conduct ongoing studies to assess the impact of AI tools over time, especially on critical outcomes like live birth rates. Then it is very important to assess data and model transparency. Make sure to verify the source and the diversity of data used to train AI models to ensure they are unbiased and representative. And opt for AI tools that offer interpretable outputs, allowing lab professionals to understand and explain AI decisions to patients. And finally, always prioritize regulatory compliance. Ensure that AI tools comply with UK regulatory standards and any specific guidance from the HFEA. Make sure to keep a comprehensive record of AI tool evaluations, including performance audits and compliance check for transparency and accountability. In order to make these AI-assisted tools a success, they need to be incorporated into guidelines and evidence-based medicine evaluations. It is made abundantly clear that this work can never be performed by a single individual, nor can it be done by a single lab. Fortunately, there are already places where guidance can be found. There is, of course, the HFEA traffic light system, which is a useful tool to keep track of the effectiveness of commercial add-ons, not only for patients, but also for professionals. Then there is Cochrane. Cochrane offers unbiased information for both patient and doctors that allows for making difficult decisions without having to read every single study out there. It helps to see which studies are designed better than others. And this will finally have to result in guidelines adopted by both ASHRAE and the ASRM organizations and be provided publicly. Fortunately, there is a new society which is called the AI Fertility Society Steering Committee, which will come out with a Croatia Consensus 2024 shortly. And this will be a very comprehensive and useful tool providing guidance on introducing AI in IVF labs. So there's a lot of stuff I talked about that will be relevant for you in the future. But what can you do now? Practically, how can your lab become a truly AI-ready IVF lab? First, make sure to look at data management. So make sure to establish protocols for data privacy and compliance, keeping in mind patient consent and the GDPR requirements. And make sure to begin with digitizing and structuring lab data, looking at patient records. We talked about EMR already, making sure thinking about embryo imagery, more than embryo imagery probably, and make sure to ensure data compatibility with AI models, because the easier it's going to be to integrate these models, the faster you're going to be able to introduce AI into your laboratory. Secondly, there is the ever important point about staff training. Make sure to offer workshops on basic AI literacy and make sure that your staff is familiarized with all AI-powered tools, specifically the ones used in IVF, and introduce these trainings on how to manage these AI-assisted tools to improve workflow and integration. And finally, make sure to look at your infrastructure and equipment. Assess the lab's infrastructure, update as necessary to support the AI tools. You have to think about how images will be processed, but also think about how to get high capacity data storage. You're not talking about gigabytes of data here, you're talking about terabytes of data that will have to be stored long term. So it's important to consider that. And make sure to think about and start forming multidisciplinary teams. So embryologists and IT and data specialists will be necessary not only to do proper implementation, but also to do maintenance going forward. Finally, I have some predictions for the future. So we've looked at a lot of things, and I think that even though the AI of today is not there yet, with enough data, rigorous and well-designed studies and cooperation between groups, models will become better. The level of automation will also increase. A second one is it will become increasingly difficult to understand the AI models and techniques because the speed with which these technologies develop is already simply mind-boggling, and it makes it a full-time job to keep track of the newest developments. I know I've spent months on preparing this paper, this presentation, and the amount of papers that have come out in the last 3 months has been huge. Also, independent evaluation, research and guidelines by the scientific organizations will be very important. And finally, labs will be automated, and only professionals will therefore be fit for embryology jobs. IT training will be necessary, and IT specialists in IVF will also be necessary, and you can either have them in-house or you have to hire third parties to do that work for you. Multidisciplinary IT biomedical teams will therefore also be part of that whole clinical treatment process. So let's see in a couple of years what will come of these predictions. So far, I have a number of references if you feel you'd like to read more up on this. That's all I wanted to share for today. Thank you very much and have a nice day.